Okay, so we're going to dive into a story that starts with a BBC engineering paper from all the way back in 1969. Now, I know what you're thinking. An engineering paper sounds a little dry, right? But trust me, this document is fascinating because it shows how a pretty simple practical problem led to this huge discovery about how we all hear sound. It's one of those classic stories of innovation. You have a team with a very straightforward goal. Hey, let's build a smaller box that sounds great. Simple. But in the process of solving that one problem, they stumbled onto a much, much bigger mystery. One that would literally change the game for audio engineering forever.
All right, so let's set the stage. What was the problem they were even trying to solve? What kicked this whole thing off?
So picture this. It's 1969. Broadcasting is breaking out of those big, stuffy, purpose-built studios. It's going mobile, out into the real world in these little vans. And that meant all their gear had to shrink down to fit, especially the single most important tool for a sound engineer, their monitoring speakers. And yeah, this really puts the challenge into perspective, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got these absolute behemoths, speakers built for acoustically perfect rooms. And on the other hand, well, they needed something that could fit in the back of a van, but sound exactly the same. It's like trying to shrink a heavyweight boxer down to the size of a featherweight, but expecting him to hit just as hard. So how in the world do you pull that off? How do you go about engineering a tiny titan of sound?
Well, the engineers had a pretty clear plan. They broke it down into 4 basic steps. First, you've got to pick the actual parts that vibrate and make the sound. Those are the drivers. Then you build the box, the cabinet, to house them. Step 3 is the real nerdy part, designing the crossover. Think of it like the speaker's brain, telling the high notes where to go and the low notes where to go. And then, of course, the moment of truth. You test the thing.
And this is where the real magic happens. I mean, these guys were clever. They used this cool new plastic called Bextrine for the main speaker cone because it was stiff and accurate. Perfect. They even had to invent a special PVC surround, that's the rubbery bit around the edge of the cone, just to make it work in such a tiny box. Every single piece was thought about, tweaked, or created from scratch. It was just amazing work. So, after all of that incredible, detailed work, the prototype was finally done. Now, for the big question, did it actually work? Could this tiny titan really perform? And there it is. Take a look. All that R&D, all that brain power, boiled down to this. A pretty simple-looking little wooden box, right? But inside was the answer to the BBC's big problem. So, the million-dollar question. How did it sound? Well, you're looking at its report card right now. And see that super flat line? That's straight A's, my friend. It means the speaker is perfectly honest. It's not boosting the bass or faking the treble. What goes in is what comes out. Just pure, clean, accurate sound. And here's more proof of just how well they did. All that messy-looking stuff at the bottom, that's distortion. Basically, unwanted junk noise the speaker itself is creating. And just look how low it is. It was just as clean as the giant studio monitors they were trying to replace. An incredible achievement. So, mission accomplished, right? They did it. They built a small speaker that sounded like a big one. They could pack it up and go home. Well, not quite. Because when they took this quote-unquote perfect speaker out into the wild, something really, really weird started to happen. And this is where the story gets really interesting. This brings us to part 2. The mystery of the room. Here's what was driving them nuts. They had this speaker that, on paper, was flawless. It measured perfectly, but then they'd take it to one mobile van, and it sounded amazing. They'd take it to another, and it sounded off. How was that even possible? They gave this problem a name, coloration. And it turned out their speaker's biggest strength, its incredible accuracy, was also what was revealing a totally new problem. The speaker was so good, so honest, that it was showing them a flaw not in itself, but in everything around it. The room. The room was messing with the sound. So the engineers had to put on their detective hats. Their new mission, figure out how a simple room could hijack the sound of their perfect speaker. They had to crack the acoustic code. And this is how they started their investigation. Their number one suspect? Reflections. The idea was pretty simple. You're not just hearing the sound coming straight from the speaker. You're also hearing that same sound a split second later as it bounces off the walls, the desk, the ceiling, and that mix, that interference, was probably the cause of all the trouble. And boom, here it is, the smoking gun. Look at the graph on the left. That's the speaker shoved into a corner.
It's a total mess, right? Those wild peaks and dips are just acoustic chaos. Now look to the right. Same speaker, same room. All they did was move it a little bit away from the walls. And look how much smoother that line is. That right there, that was the big aha moment. And this discovery allowed them to finally define the problem perfectly. Acoustic coloration. It's that interference between the sound you hear directly and all the sound bouncing around the room. They crash into each other, boosting some notes, canceling out others, and basically changing the music before it even gets to your ears. And they spelled it out right there in their official paper. They said, look, this degradation in quality, it's caused entirely by the sound reflecting off nearby surfaces. It wasn't the speaker. The room was the guilty party all along. And that is the big, fundamental takeaway from this whole thing. A room isn't just a passive box that holds your stereo. No, it's an active component. It's playing along with the music. They started out trying to build a better speaker, and they ended up proving that the speaker is only half the story. So the BBC's incredible discovery was this. The room is part of the instrument, which leaves all of us with a pretty profound question to think about, right? The next time you sit down to listen to your favorite album, just ask yourself, what is my room doing to this music?